me turn my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, apologies. I know I left you hanging last week. I want to say that we're doubling up on an episode today, or on episodes, I should say, today. I was deathly ill with the flu, and I mentioned it last episode, but that was sort of part of, stuff hit the fan, if you will, okay? Because I got so sick, I couldn't finish episodes, I couldn't do interviews that I was supposed to have. On top of that, we were already under a really tight window because I was on tour, and for the beginning part of March, essentially. So I wasn't able to record episodes ahead of time like I normally would have. So we really were like already under a tight deadline, and then me being deathly ill from the flu, just everything went out the window. We're getting back on track though, thank you God. I'm still like not 100%. I probably still sound a little bit crazy. Might be some disgusting sounding coughs or throat clearing you might hear at some point. Apologies, but here we are. We're human. Anyway, it's Financial Literacy Month. It's April, right? And I'm really excited about today's show. I don't normally give you that many reallys. I'm genuinely excited because my goal with Financial Literacy Month this year, and I'll touch on it a bit when our guest hops on, but I really wanted to just do something different, right? Because I feel like we're evolving here, right? If at this point, man, it's 3 years, 3 seasons of the show. This would be, I think, my third year doing Financial Literacy Month. I've done a lot of the basics, stock investing and credit and real estate and all these different sort of things. And there are other amazing resources out there that do this on the regular, right? So I was really racking my brain, and you kind of saw this in the last episode, but to reiterate, what is something different I can bring to the financial conversation that to me is a bit more personal, is a bit more emotional, and there's a human aspect to it, And that's why we did mental health aspect of finances a bit in the last show. And this one specifically, like reading, the topics of, because I have it laid out as far as like what I'm going to be speaking about in terms of this month's financial narrative and financial focus. This one, to me, I was so excited. It's the cost of the American dream, essentially, right? And is it worth it? Is it even real anymore? Was it ever real for Latinos, right? And I've touched on this in various ways. But because of the uncertain economic times that we're in right now, right? There's so much talk about tariffs and, are we going towards a depression? Is the stock market a crash? A lot of people are losing jobs in general. I mean, entire government agencies are just disappearing, and those are jobs. There's so much uncertainty. And I think the way that I like to look at times like this is when I feel nervous, I feel uncertain, I ask myself, where is the opportunity? Because there's always opportunity, right? And, I can give you the finance bro mindset of like companies like Uber were created during the recession and whatever, right? So there's always opportunity during the fire, if you will, right? That's why things like disaster capitalism, as disgusting as it is, are a thing. But the opportunity I sort of see in today's day and age where we are is predicated on the fact that if the American dream is a lie, if it's not available for my generation and younger, or for many people, I think of various generations at this point, or it no longer is feasible for them, or their version of it is dwindling away, that now means the safe route is no longer safe. So the, risky, if you will, quote unquote, risky route that involves the things that you're passionate about, that sounds more and more like a viable option, right? And there's opportunity there. And I wanted to bring on somebody who already talks about thinking outside of the box with the work that he does with BeActChange, Dr. Paul Rivera, and he's he was an economist, a diplomat. He has personal connections to a lot of what's happening right now in the economy. We'll touch on that, but he also is somebody who his family lives abroad as well in Dominican Republic. They left their traditional jobs that they had and are entrepreneurs now, doing various things and in sort of the educational space as far as motivation and the Latin community specifically. And it's out of the box thinking that's going to get us through these difficult times, right? And again, there's other people doing incredible work in terms of investing and all these different things, and I'm sure there's plenty of opportunity as well on that end. I could have brought over like a stock market person that's telling you to buy right now if you have money saved and things like that. But for me, I think it was more important to say we've got to the boiling point where the American dream is not a real thing. Most of us can't afford a house. If I hadn't purchased my house in 2020 when things were crazy, I would not be a homeowner right now, right? So many of the industries or jobs or ideas that I had planned are, have gone belly up because of the economy. So there's so much uncertainty, but again, there's so much opportunity within that. And I feel like I'm babbling and talking in circles, so I'll probably just cut it here. And it's because I'm just really excited about this conversation, right? But it's basically, the gist of this conversation is, if the American dream is dead, or it was a lie, or was never meant for us, what's next? And that's what we're going to talk about today with Dr. Paul Rivera. And we'll do it as one long Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. My guest today, returning to the show, he is a co-founder of BeActChange. He has a career that spans from academia to diplomacy, international economics, and strategic coaching. My guy, Dr. Paul Rivera, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good, man. I'm so glad to be back here. It is an honor to be invited back to the show. This is great. I'm so glad to be here. I wish we were here to talk about like all the great stuff happening in the world, but it's a really timely topic today to talk about some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of I was telling you that I was like, I was going to kind of tackle this conversation alone, and then I just kept referencing you and I's conversation. I felt like there was so much we didn't dive into, but then also to your point, there's so much that is far more relevant than even when we first sat down. And kind of it being Financial Literacy Month, I've done these in the past each year. We've covered kind of the basics of credit and investing and all these different things. But for this year, I kind of wanted to be a little bit outside of the box in terms of, I think, what people consider to be financial conversations. And this one right here is something that has been really on my mind heavily. I know it's something you speak about a lot. It's this idea of the American dream, right? And man, we're living in 2025 where everything that made up the American dream doesn't seem feasible for anybody at this point, right? And I know that for you specifically, when you do some of your speaking engagements, one of the topics that you do sort of specialize in is this idea, in your words, the broken promises and the fallacy of the American dream for Latinos. And I would love for you to kind of start there, giving me sort of the elevator pitch as to what that conversation is all about.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot there. So for one, it's based on our book. Our book is called Creating Your Limitless Life. Mm-hmm. And then the subtitle of it is Chasing the American Dream, and it's crossed out. Mm-hmm. So, our book really has this premise that the whole concept of the American dream as it's been applied in the US especially, but really all over the developed world, is really something that has created a lot of division, a scarcity mindset, a lot of toxicity. And ultimately, as we look at it, I focus specifically on the Latino population and really in the United States, has been something that's been so damaging to families, to mental health. The whole concept of the American dream, as it was first conceived, was that in a land of equal opportunity. What you need to get ahead is basically your ganas, your will to work, your own energy you brought to it. There's so many of those stories that you read about from the earlier days where, all these people, these immigrants who showed up and said, I had nothing but $18 in my pocket, and that's all I had. And from that, I bootstrapped and I did all of this stuff, And so as we project forward, one, we see that whole concept of starting from equality is out, right? That's gone. That's not something that ever existed, and much less today, especially as we see the dismantling of DEI and all of those things. Anything that would even try to sort of level that playing field, that's out at this point. Add to that, then, that there are so many other obstacles that are on top of it. You mentioned it. There's so many youth who 85% of youth still believe in the American dream. They still kind of want it. Over 60% of them, though, don't really believe that they can get there. So it's not just a dream, it's a pipe dream. It's become so far out of reach for them. As you start seeing that, and this isn't something new, for one, sure, that this sort of decay of the American dream, such as it's portrayed in movies and in sort of American folklore, is something that's been on the decline for my entire lifetime. For the last 50 years, this has been on the downslide as we've been de-emphasizing one, technical and vocational, and moving to a much more service-based economy. As a country, as we've been de-emphasizing education in terms of the investment that we make at the national level. You can't have a service economy if you're not educating your workers, right? It doesn't make any sense. You start seeing all of these young people who are trying to get there, who are being told by society, by their parents, by media, that this is the bar that you need to achieve. And instead of it being sort of something that is about being your highest aspiration and what matters to you, the American dream turns out to be, do you have a house? Do you have a car? Do you have a dog? Have you been married? How many kids do you have? It's all these very metric-based things. Mm-hmm. And as immigrants, focusing on the Latino population in particular, as immigrants and children of immigrants, we have all of these burdens placed on top of us, plus things that are culturally inherited from Latin America and all of that. Mm-hmm. And they find that it's too much. It's too much. That's why we start seeing, for example, mental health issues. There are so many more mental health issues among young Latinos, young Latino men who are really feeling that pressure. There's suicidal ideation, as we mentioned before, that's a much higher rate than other comparable age groups and other ethnic groups. And the suicidal ideation piece is really important, right? It's not just that they're sad or that they're depressed or they're stressed. They are so stressed that they contemplate whether they have any value to go on living. That's what the American dream is doing to not just Latinos, but, at this point, all Americans. But it's something that hits immigrant populations, BIPOC populations so much harder when that wealth cushion isn't necessarily there to take on some of these shocks, frankly, that are happening in the economy and society right now. So it's a really, really critical time for people to really reassess what they value and what they're striving for and how they're going about it.
Yeah, and I love that last sentence right there, the idea of reassessing, right? And really getting down to what you value, right? Because I think a lot of us are trying to live out the sort of fantasy of our parents almost, right? Or for, I think, a lot of people, because it was so difficult for their parents, there's this guilt of like, I have to do all, check all the boxes and do all the things that they weren't able to do, right? Because they sacrificed so much for me. And I think that is sort of what is the unique aspect specifically of immigrant children having to sort of navigate that, cultural and family sort of indoctrination, if you will, into the American dream and the belief of it. But then that other side of you that's tugging and pulling of like, well, what actually makes me happy,
Right.
Because the irony sort of where we are right now, specifically in the United States, but I'd imagine globally, is that even the shit that you hate doing isn't enough to pay the bills anymore, right? There was a time period where, I can think about my father's generation, went to school for something he didn't particularly enjoy and had a job he didn't particularly enjoy, but it put food on the table, it paid for the bills, it did all those things, right? So it was kind of an even sacrifice almost, right? And almost I see that as an opportunity in today's day and age where it's like, listen, if I'm going to suffer, I might as well suffer for the things that I actually enjoy doing rather than suffer at a job I hate just to have the car that everybody respects me for, quote unquote, and the house and all these different things, right? And I think that is sort of the point I'm trying to get at, I think, with this conversation is we're in a really interesting and an incredibly difficult time. And those who are going to find their way out of this in a positive way are those who begin to think outside of the box and begin to deprogram, I think, some of those norms that have been instilled in us since we were very young.
I think so completely. I mean, yeah, you said some really, really important stuff there. One is that as children of immigrants, we carry the dreams of our parents. We inherit those. Yes. And that's a weight that's placed upon us. We didn't choose that necessarily. They chose it, and they chose it for a very good reason most of the time. But their concept of what success is, they're the ones who really love the American dream for us. That's what they want for us, And exactly as you say, that there's a recent article that came out that was really fascinating that basically talks about how the America where your dad could, grab his lunch pail and go off to work at a job that was oftentimes really physically grueling, didn't necessarily respect the mind that he brought to the task, but was able to come home and was able to provide for the family and obtain the metrics of the American dream. That America is gone, and that America is where the idea, for example, of work-life balance came out, right? Because there's your work and there's your life, and people saw those as really, really separate, right? Work is where, I go to earn what I have to earn, and then I live outside, right? Mm-hmm. As we're seeing this whole transition in terms of the economy, in terms of society, in terms of young people really beginning to change the expectations of what success looks like and all of that, we're shifting from a model of work-life balance to more like work-life integration, right? My work is part of my life. I'm spending part of my precious life hours doing this. I want it to be something that is aligned with me, something that aligns with my values, something that makes me feel good for what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and the unique the superpower that I bring to that particular situation. So that whole shift is definitely happening. And I would say that from our point of view, in terms of BeActChange, my business and the book, that's definitely something that we advocate, because that alignment is what starts to change also a lot of those mental health issues, right? When you are acting in alignment with your internal compass, right? When you are aligned with your purpose, when you're aligned with your values, when you see yourself advancing in the world what you value and using the strength and the superpower that you bring to it, that is when you start to really get into that flow where you are presenting the best version of yourself. You're providing, frankly, the greatest economic value to the world in that sense, because that is the best version of you. So that's definitely something that we advocate and push for as hard as we can.
No, and I want to dive a bit deeper into that, but I kind of want to just also, for the sake of setting, I guess, the baseline here. You have a background in economics. I kind of want to also talk about how we got here, because the irony is, to your point, the American dream was never really meant for us, right, as children of immigrants. But now it's not really meant for anybody, right? Even those who were born into privilege, to a degree because of their skin color and their, lineage, they're starting to feel the effects of sort of what I would call this sort of extreme capitalism where we are now, and that is a drastic turn that I think has happened from when you talk about the 50s and 60s, when they talk about this idea of the American dream and like the, white picket fence and the stay-at-home wife that kept the house, and like the husband went to work and was able to pay for the entire family and the house and the car off of one single income, right?
Right.
And now that is completely shifted, but it's because also how corporations and companies are treating business and the mindset of sort of, I guess, squeezing every penny they possibly can, and passing the buck on to the employees and the consumer, right? So I would love to sort of hear for a little bit more of an economics background into what you've seen that transition that really has caused the American dream to be non-existent for anybody almost at this point.
I will tell you, and I hope I don't get too theoretical in this, because I know that I tend to do that. But it's one of the things that's hardest for me as an economist. What the fascinating thing about economics as a field of study is that pretty much in the entire world, all economists are pretty much trained the same. Like, we study the same guys. We all do the same math problems. We all learn about optimization. Like, economics is the study of optimization, and optimization means creating a goal and then finding the most efficient path to that goal. So at the end of the day, what economics ends up really being about is the implementation and study of efficiency, right? So efficiency takes a couple of different routes. One is productivity, where we can get to that ultimate goal by becoming more productive, right? By implementing technology, by finding better ways to do what we do. The other way is by reducing costs, right? By making it cheaper to get there. We also find that we create efficiencies in reaching those goals. What's super important, one of the reasons why I often argue that economists shouldn't be the person who's necessarily doing your strategy for you. Economists are also trained to see constraints. So in that vision of optimization and efficiency and productivity and cost savings, what economists are trained to see is always ask the question, what's going to hold you back? What's going to hold you back? And so economists constantly see all of the roadblocks on the way to that goal. And so the economist is never going to be the one who says to you, you know what? Dream super big. You are freaking amazing. You are limitless, and you can do whatever. Right? The economist is never going to be the one to say that, because the economist is going to be like, wait, there's all this stuff that's in your way. Look what's going to get in your way. You've got culture. You're brown. You're this, right? Your parents don't speak English. You got all these things in your way. You're not going to make it. So you might as well dream low, and let's just find the optimal way for you to dream low. So what that's the one side, that the study of economics gets so involved in the efficiency that, one, you forget the humanity in it. You forget the humanity. So, and that's what's been implemented. So much of the modern Western capitalist economic system is based on traditional economics, right? And so in traditional economics, everybody is pretty much replaceable. You're a cog in the wheel. Right. And the extent to which you are able to be either more productive or less expensive, that's the value that you have, right? So as we see everything built on that, like, there was a time where that worked for us, right? Because we were at one point a manufacturing economy. We made stuff, we built stuff. And that's sort of the structure of the economy that the United States was built on, and the American dream was built on. Was, we had these vast natural resources. We brought in people, we skilled them up on how to use these natural resources, and that was really the source of that growth. There came a point where the wealth that the United States had accumulated was large enough that basically the average wage of the average American was outcompeting those of other countries. And as transportation starts to become cheaper and more efficient, we start to trade with other countries, and we start to say, hey, you know what? I could make this here in the United States, but I could offshore that, and it's cheaper to do it there. Their workers get paid less, and it's cheaper. And what's cheaper? Cheaper is efficient. Cheaper takes me towards optimization. So I start shifting the structure of the economy in the United States, little by little, little by little. Pretty soon, what we find is that our real value was in innovation. We were coming up with the ideas, right? And you can see that really, really strongly, especially in the post-World War II era. The United States was the leader in the innovation, the space technology, all of that. That was the United States. Then what happened? Then we start seeing some shifts, especially domestically, in terms of how we valued education. Because suddenly, when you're a service economy now, you're a mind economy now, suddenly the technical work doesn't have as much value anymore, right? We're not investing, as I said before, we're not investing in vocational education like we used to. There's the trades that are so important are falling off. And then we also cut off our education investment too. So we're not creating the space to continue the comparative advantage we had created for ourselves in terms of that idea economy, the innovation economy. That's falling off too. So now we're sort of paying the price for it, right? We're not technically skilled. We're not the top of the innovation necessarily anymore. And we have a whole bunch of people. We have millions and millions of people who are struggling to make it now. So we see now prices going up, wages staying stagnant, which means by definition, people are becoming relatively less wealthy, right? And so now by any definition of the American dream, it's harder to get to. Right. And then add on top of that, any systemic racism, cultural biases, and any other weight that you have to carry as well. And it is a brutal time.
Yeah, no. And to your point, the powers that be are people who operate from that mindset of efficiency. Right. And they don't have any sort of emotional connection to the lives that they're affecting, right? They're looking at basically spreadsheets and erasing people as if they're just numbers on a piece of paper. And with AI and all these different things, a lot of industries are going to be disrupted for the worst, as far as if you are an American worker, if you're concerned. And I think now to kind of what we've been getting to is, it's the time for us as human beings to begin to think outside of the box, to accept the fact that what we've been taught, the traditions we've been taught, all we know about the workforce and what our lives are supposed to look like in adulthood, much of it was a lie, or unfortunately we missed the boat on those quote unquote opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And now, I think, and for a lot of people that's a bitter pill to swallow, but again, there's an opportunity there, right? Because now you're in creation mode almost, which to me is exciting. It is no longer falling in line, and when you take away the safety net, it's now you being able to have more of an honest conversation as to what you truly want to do in this life, right?
Yeah.
And that means maybe not following the traditional route or the expectations of parents, right? And that's kind of where I want to begin to navigate towards. And, even for me, when I first I was looking at properties. I wanted to do that, right? I wanted to be a homeowner. And I'm very fortunate that I had people around me who were investing at the time, right? Who were far more successful than me. And I saw what they were doing in creating wealth and creating income from the properties they were buying, rather than just paying this mortgage month over month and, all the expenses that come along with it. And I remember specifically showing my mom a property I was looking at, and it wasn't like the traditional, aesthetically pleasing place. It was a multi-use building, right? And it had a commercial and residential. And that's what I showed her. I said, this is what I want to buy as my first home, essentially, because I want something that could yield me income. And further down the line, one day I'll get that American dream home. And I remember her not being able to compute that in her mind initially, right? She was so programmed into wanting to have the cute house that, we entertain family at and all these things, that she couldn't get why the hell I had an interest in this ugly ass eyesore of a building, right?
Yeah.
And thankfully I ignored that, ignored her perspective, because it's yielded me a comfort that I wouldn't have had I been in just a house. But it wasn't easy, and I consider myself somebody who doesn't follow much of what his parents want him to do. And even for me, there was still that back and forth of like wanting the house I can show off to my friends, sure, that is aesthetically pleasing, right? That I could have the barbecues at and all those things. And I had to fight that urge, right? It was so deeply ingrained in me. And I know that you've, throughout the course of your life, had to do so many of those different things. I think on the last show we talked about how you sort of let go of a particular friend group and really just, kind of restarted your life. But I also know that your family currently lives in DR, or did at least, right, in the Dominican Republic, which for most people is like, they can't even compute that in their minds, right? Leaving the United States of America. So I guess let's start there with a bit of the unlearning that has to happen in order to really provide yourself with not only the best opportunity, but I think a more authentic vantage point of what you really want, right? How do we get the voice of our parents out of our head that is clogging up and dulling down the real voice of our actual heart and our authentic self?
For sure. There's so much that you just said that resonated with me. One, I'm actually calling you from Santo Domingo today, so
Beautiful.
I'm there, and it's really hard for my immigrant parents in the United States who left Latin America to be like, ¿Por qué carajo están regresando? Like, why are you going back to Latin America? That's the place we went running away from. But this is where I feel at home. I feel at home in Latin America. These are my people, and I feel good. So that listening to your gut and trying to tune out all those voices around you it's a real skill to develop, but we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing is, the whole situation that you talked about there in the beginning has actually happened to us. So we're business owners, we're social enterprise. With this administration, the changes that they implemented, if you followed, they shut down U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Yep. And as a business, about a third of our contracts were with them. Mm-hmm. And then so much of the other work that we do, either on the business side or on the social enterprise side of what we do, has been talking to Black and brown communities, BIPOC communities all around the United States. So the other half of what we do actually is DEI. Mm-hmm. So basically in the space of 2 weeks after January 20th, we had 95% of our income decimated, gone, eliminated, gone. As a business, as a household, as a family, gone. Right. So that whole thing, that like the situation that you talked about of now's the time to be creative, to be authentic, to really tap into what's meaningful to you, is definitely the situation that we're in. But at the same time, there's there's kind of a mourning that goes with that, because we had built something beautiful, something that we had built it to align with us, and just to be told that your government, your country thinks now that this is not valuable, that in fact that you are, as a former diplomat for USAID, I was not directly to me, but to me and all my colleagues, we were called traitors, thieves, and all sorts of things, so it's been a whole mourning process to go through, and then now picking ourselves up again, right. And exactly as you said, finding in the end, actually much more authentic and much more powerful ways of doing what we want to do. Okay. So the first thing is, exactly as you said, beginning to unlearn everything that's been placed on us, everything that we've been carrying. One of the things that I talk about a lot when I do public speaking is the word liberation. Mm-hmm. So the word liberation actually is a Latin-based word. And, if you're a Spanish speaker, that the word, for example, for like a pound, weight, is libra. So libra and libre, which are, freedom and weight, actually come from the same root word. And so there's a lot of philosophical understanding that liberation isn't actually, for example, the absence of responsibility. It's not carrying any weight. Liberation is actually being able to put down the weight that isn't yours and pick up your weight. That's what liberation is. It's kind of a choosing, right? And so in that process, one of the first things that we tell people is to think about your uniqueness. Like, what is it that any storm that comes, no matter what's up, what's down, what job you're in, what situation you're in, what is it that you bring to that job? So, for example, we call it the $40 billion question. It kind of goes like this. Let's say that the G7, the global 7 powers, they come to you and they say, we have $40 billion for you to solve one global problem. What problem would you want to solve? Right. And people answer all kinds of things, water, education, healthcare for everyone, poverty, hunger, whatever it is, whatever matters to that person. Okay, great. They love your idea. They're ready to sign the check over to you, but they got one question for you. And that question is, I just need you to give me basically the 3 to 5 steps of what you're going to do with the money. Like, how are you going to solve the problem? Right. And so, for example, we get a lot of folks who say things like hunger or food scarcity or whatever it is. Right. And there are some people who will answer the question by saying, okay, the first thing that I would do is that I would figure out where there is the greatest need. And then the second thing I'm going to do is that I would rally all of the NGOs and all the community organizations that are around. And then the third thing is that I would work on distribution methodologies and all of this and make sure that there's equality, right? So that one person answers like that. Another person says, I'm also interested in food insecurity and hunger, but here's what I would do. The first thing that I would do is that I would find for every location, what's the most fertile plant that we can grow there. And I would work with the growing associations, and I would create greater production of food and start alleviating it that way. So it's super fascinating, because what you find out that the actual global problem, here's the secret, the actual global problem doesn't even matter. What we're looking for is your how-to. How do you solve those problems, right? And so that is super, super unique to almost anyone. Nobody answers that question the same. Everybody has their own unique how-to. And what you start to find out is that unique how-to, in some way, you apply to everything in your life, right? When your phone rings and your buddy's on the other line, and he's like, Paul, I need your help with something. I know what they're going to help me, what they're going to ask me for, because I have that how-to. That's what people come to me for, right? I bring that to every situation. Understanding that about yourself is super important. The second thing is starting to speak about yourself in that way and calling it your superpower. We spend a lot of time jumping up and down, talking to young Latinos and Latinas all over the country, saying, you have a superpower. This unique how-to that you bring to the problems in the world, your problem-solving approach is unique to you. It's your value add in this world, right? It's really starting to try to change. Like, as we talked about that whole idea of efficiency and productivity, it's so much more than physically what you bring, right? What I bring, my productivity, my value is this how-to that I bring to any situation, and I'm somebody who has, for example, I've worked as an EMT, I worked retail, I worked at a paint manufacturer, I've been a college professor, I've been a diplomat, a mechanic, a roofer, an AC repairman. I've done everything. And guess what? I bring the same how-to to every situation, because that's what I bring. And so as we start thinking about, for example, deprogramming ourselves, starting to let go of the pressures and the expectations that are placed on us, it's really important for us to start thinking about and talking about ourselves in terms of that superpower, right? That this is what you say. This is what you say in a job interview. When they say, why are you qualified? Why do you want this job? You say, you know what? I bring this superpower that is extremely valuable to you. So that is step one. There's a lot more we could talk about, but that's step one in starting to deprogram those expectations that are placed upon you and really connect with something that is authentic to you, that's valuable to you and meaningful to you.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And there's actually something that you touched on there that I'd love to sort of pick your brain on a little bit further, right? And you're talking about all these different jobs that you've had, right? And I'd imagine you are not super passionate about manufacturing paint or, particular retail jobs. But I find it intriguing that you said you found a way to show up each time as that sort of best version of yourself, right? And present yourself through your strongest sort of natural skill set almost. And I think for a lot of people, whether it be they were laid off and now they're sort of having to take odd jobs or a job that that they're not interested in, right? That maybe they love their job, and now with the economy and all that's happening, they might have to do some extra side hustles or take on a job for the time being until they find that next opportunity that they love. I've always struggled with this is, how do I not essentially just become miserable or jaded or angry at the world as I'm doing the tough grunt work BS job that I have to do to keep the lights on while fighting to make my dreams come true?
I think there's a lot of intentionality that has to go into it. So, I mean, I've been there. I mean, you don't do as many jobs as I've done without having that need. You know what I mean? To be fair, paint manufacturing is incredibly interesting and exciting, so much more than you would think. You know, there's a whole chemistry that goes behind it. It's really fascinating stuff. But at the same time, you know, as you said, it wasn't my passion. I did that because I had to, you know. So there's an intentionality that goes behind it. So you need to know, for example, you need to be very cognizant. It needs to be in your mind daily how it is that your unique how it is that you are applying it in that job. Okay, so for example, one of my biggest how-tos, one of the big things that I bring is that I have the perspective, the talent, whatever it is, of seeing in people the potential that they oftentimes don't see in themselves. Right? So which means I'm really good at bringing together a team and making that team do things together that no single individual could have ever conceived of. Right? It was super, super, super useful to me when I was in the paint manufacturing business, because I was able to be in a situation where I resolved problems between shipping and manufacturing and sales and accounts receivable that had been there for years, but nobody had actually taken the time to say, hey, these people basically each have these really interesting superpowers that we're not using in the right way, and you need to bring them together, right? So one thing is that it's understanding that you have that superpower and knowing, even in the job that you know isn't your passion, even in the job that you know you're in there really for the paycheck, how it is that you're somehow using that superpower of yours. So that's intentionality one. The second thing is that you prioritize what you schedule. And this is like a super micro thing, but your time is your most precious asset. And how it is that you choose to spend your time tells you what you value and what you're using your time for. So, you know, this means, for example, for me, being here with you is super important for me. This is part of my how-to. This is part of my alignment, my purpose. You called me yesterday to see if we could do this, and I jumped on it as soon as I could, because this is really important for me. This is how I want to be spending some time, right? Talking to you, talking to your listeners, because this message is really important to me that people hear it, right? So this is part of my alignment. It's part of my how-to. I'm going to make that time for it. And whatever it is for you, you need to make that time. And it's not just about, you know, I don't mean it necessarily in the sense of like wellness, but of really understanding in your gut that you are spending some of your time doing something that is valuable to you, even though the situation might not be optimal. And I've been there, you know what I mean? I've been there where you're tired, you're frustrated, you're taking side jobs, odd jobs. I've had up to like 4 jobs at the same time, you know, in my past. And it's tough, but you get through it knowing that at least I'm bringing a piece of me into this. You know, I'm not just a cog in the wheel. There's something of value that I bring to this situation. And that's what starts to fill my soul, you know? And then little by little, as you prioritize, as you make that space in your life, that starts to grow, you know? And the other thing, super important, and I'm going to mention it because I want to make sure that we don't leave without talking about it, especially as Latinos, as BIPOC, Black and brown folks. One of the things that we're not taught to do is to get in touch with our intuition. You know, we've hinted at it several times so far. You know, you buying that multi-use property, there was something inside of you telling you, you know what, man, this is right. This is what you need to do, you know? And it's tough. We're not taught to do that, right? In fact, you said it yourself. You had all of these external voices telling you the opposite, right?
Because we're brought up with fear, right? It's
100%. Yeah.
So much of our parenting that we were raised with was just based upon us being scared of our parents, right? And that fear then begins to cloud the actual instinct that you have, the gut feeling, and you begin to like, you're not sure which voice is the actual correct one, right? Which is truly you. That like that, I don't mean to cut you off, sorry, but that like screamed out at me as you said that, like the fear that we've been raised on specifically in our community, that parenting style, I think makes us question our intuition and therefore not make decisions based upon what we truly want.
100%, and there's so many layers to that, so part of it is exactly what you're saying. The second thing though is that like all of our people come from like our ancestors, our traditions are based on intuition and a kind of spirituality and a kind of group understanding that one between colonialism and immigration and all of that has been slowly stripped away from us. And blows my mind, for example, to see how it's the adoption of those practices have somehow been repackaged, gate kept by wealth and whiteness, frankly, and then made inaccessible to us when it was ours all along. When we think about things like meditative practices, when we think about breath work, I'm a breath work facilitator actually, and it's been one of the most amazing things because it feels like coming home. You know what I mean? When you do this, you feels like, man, this is what I'm doing and it feels good because it's the echoes of my past and my ancestors and this ancestral wisdom that, holy shit, it has been inside of me all along. Where has this been? So anything that we can do to start to strip away some of the layers of emotional armor that we place around ourselves, to actually listen to that gut feeling, to listen to that intuition and start learning to trust it as the truth and the wisdom that it is what takes you to like quantum leap next level. And it's so interesting. This is one of the areas that I've been researching lately. Like as you talk to, or as you listen to, or you hear any of these huge, like global stage hitters, like all of them talk about how important it is to access that intuition, to learn to listen to it and to trust it and to take those actions. And I thought, man, it's exactly what you said. I'm like, that is like the opposite of everything that we've been taught, everything that we've been told. When you talk about unlearning, and reprogramming and frankly, decolonizing, that's a huge part of it, and for me, breathwork has been transformational, like the ability to listen. And I'm somebody who my brain doesn't stop. My body doesn't stop. You know what I mean? I'm like on the go all day and my mind is firing and I'm doing all kinds of things. So that space that you have to make for yourself to just like turn all the volume down and actually hear what's inside of you is so crucial. That's one of the things that lets you, what I mean? It lets you like float for a second and see over the surface of the water and see what else could be there,
Yeah. And I love that visual right there. You said of being kind of float over the surface of the water and see what's there. And I agree. I think, we need that calm and that presence of mind to listen to ourselves almost, right? And there's so many other things I can get into, but I want to touch on two last things because I want to be respectful of your time, but I definitely want to get into the DR move. But the one thing I do want to touch on in between there, because I think it's probably super relevant for so many people in 2025. You talk about, you and your wife and your businesses relying on these contracts that within the span of a few days, your entire world is flipped upside down, right? And I think, I think most people have gone through those sort of moments throughout the course of their life when there have been big events in the world and in the country that you can't really control, right? I think about my father was laid off twice in his career. One was 9/11, the other was 2008, housing market crash essentially, and that caused jobs and things like that to be lost. But it feels like because of how quickly things are moving in today's world, be it the unstable powers that be, but I think also just how quickly technology is advancing, it feels like these sort of rug being pulled from under us moments are happening far more often, or feel like there's far more opportunity for them to happen. So I'm curious, for you, having gone through that, how do you sort of, maybe what do you learn to sort of try and be a bit more proactive or protect yourself from inevitable, things like this happening that are really so far out of your control and you have no time to really plan for it?
It's a great question. I mean, it's definitely something that is a very specific question that we've been pondering the last couple of months, because we built our business thinking that we were diversified, and we built our business thinking that we had insulated ourselves against a lot of these sort of potential shocks that could come, and I mean, we never would have, it never could have been in our realm of possibilities what's actually happened.
Sure.
The dismantling of an entire agency of the government, not something that was in my card deck.
Sure.
And the tone that would back it, not something that I could have anticipated. I think that as we're moving forward and picking up and I keep wanting to say reconstructing, but reconstructing isn't exactly the right word, because it's still us. It's still our core. Sure. Right. And so it's really about finding really who our client is, who our avatar is. That's something that's been really important for us. Like one of the questions that we've had is, we were providing services, for example, to the federal government for a long time. And as we start thinking about it, we start thinking about, we're all about diversity, equity, inclusion. We're all about advancing collective power. We're all about basically spreading superpowers. And as we start thinking about it, that's not necessarily the values of that institution. That's not really aligned with us anymore, and maybe it never was. And that maybe we were just doing that out of comfort, and that's what we knew, So one big thing is that I think we're focusing a lot more on values alignment in terms of the way that we're constructing our business plans, our marketing plans, and who it is that we're trying to attract. We've said it very explicitly, especially in the last couple of months, but we've said it very explicitly that we want to work with people who want to do good in the world. I don't necessarily want to work with, for example, an entity that is exclusively focused on profit making. Because we've just talked about it. I know what that perspective does to people, and that's not where I want to be. Right. So for us, the realignment of values has been really, really important. I think that we've doubled down on believing in our value, our superpower, our community. And frankly, we've talked for a long time about the idea of collective power, that, when I have a superpower, you have a superpower, and we put it together, that's collective power. And that by far has to be the best solution for us as a community, as a nation. And that's really what we're focusing on. And that's, I hope it pays off. You know what I mean? Because that's my hope in humanity in a lot of ways, that by sticking to what is values for us, value driven, heart driven, soul driven, what feels good to us, I think is what's going to be right. And frankly, so far, so good. I'm actually really, really relieved. After this whole mourning period, you're like, well, this is, we talked about it, my wife and I, and this is what we want to do. And this is how we want to talk about our business. We want to start doing breath work a lot more with Black and brown communities. And, and we want to integrate that as part of our business. And we want to make sure we don't stop talking to the youth, which I know is so much part of that movement. And we really want to talk to the change makers in the world, the ones who want to make a difference. And I would say just in the last week or so, we're starting to see that shift coming around. We're starting to see some opportunities really start flowing to us, and it's just heartwarming, to see that, despite the rug being pulled out from us multiple times, your superpower is still there. It still has value. You still have champions out there.
It sounds like it's a level of surrender almost, right? And it's like, as you're saying that, it's so funny because I think it could sound from the outside listening, it can sound a little hokey, a little campfire, you know what I mean? Like a little stereotypical yogi talk type of thing like we sort of look at and look kind of, hold our nose up to. But it's so sort of true because I think about, particularly the end of 2024, I was at a bit of a place of just feeling lost, right? And a couple things didn't work out the way I'd intended. And as I surrendered and just said, let's get back to basics. What really at my core makes me happy? Where do I feel like I'm delivering the most value? Like what will just bring the best version of myself out? And let's not think about how we're monetizing it right now. Let's just kind of start getting back to playing in the sand almost as a kid, right? And figuring that part out. And the irony is, the deeper I dove into that, all of a sudden now, the opportunities that I had been like white knuckling, holding on to for dear life and hoping they would happen, now they're beginning to flourish as I've begun to just surrender into what naturally comes to me and what naturally is bringing me joy. And again, I know for a lot of people who are maybe still in that mourning period, this might sound batshit crazy to them, but there is just something about letting go a bit. And when you're in a mentally good place and you are surrounded by what you love, things just begin to be attracted to you, right? And I think you can use the simplest example, I think, for people. It's like if you're a guy looking for a girl at a bar or a club, if you are sitting there and you're bored, your arms are crossed, you look miserable, what are the odds that a girl's going to come up to you and want to talk to you or interact with you, right? The best means of getting that interaction you're looking for is by being the life of the party, by being fun, by being somebody who others are looking at and saying, hey, I want to party with that guy. Whatever. Like, that's why we came out, is to have fun. So we should attach ourselves to the person who's actually doing that, right? And I think that is so much of the recipe for quote unquote success, but more in terms of success, I mean happiness, right? And bouncing back from difficult events, because to your point, your superpower is always there. The things that you're great at, right? The stuff that comes naturally to you, your ability to make money doesn't disappear because now this opportunity is gone, right? Your ability to create those opportunities is still there. It just might look differently, for moving forward. And I think I love what you're saying there, that sort of act of surrender. But I think in a practical sense here, I want to close out talking about this move to Dominican Republic, right? Because to me, this is the practical sense of how to put yourself in the best position possible in terms of creating your opportunity. And it's sort of the idea of addition through subtraction, right? The idea of letting go of sort of the colonized mindset, if you will, of the fancy car and the fancy house in the right area code, in the right zip code, and getting down to basics of what really makes you happy. And oftentimes we don't need as much of the extra stuff as we think we do, right? We don't need the particular salary that sounds sexy to somebody when we say it out loud, right? And we don't need as much of that. And when we begin to subtract that, we give ourselves more time to be active in the things that actually bring us joy, right? And that to me is, I think, what's inspiring about people like yourself who break out of the norm. And also this just like American exceptionalism that we believe every other country in the world is like on a dirt floor somewhere still. You know what I mean? Like that they're all like they're all using rotary phones, like that we are the only people on earth with like running water, like that's like the mindset I think we've been brought up in. So I think, let's close out talking about sort of that mindset you had of being like, let's move to a place that is cheaper and has all the other things, like, I guess, I'll let you explain that for us.
It's a super fascinating place to be, actually. And I mean, we happen to be in the DR, but it could be almost anywhere in Latin America for sure. And Latin America is characterized, one, by actually quite a bit of economic inequality. So there is fantastic wealth here, and there's tremendous poverty. There's actually a Maserati dealer here. There's a Lamborghini dealer here.
Yeah.
And then there's also, people whose children walk around with no clothes, and, and there's everything in between. However, for us, it's important for my wife and I, one, to live in a place where we feel good. Mm-hmm. And, part of that is, for example, that as a brown guy, nobody looks at me funny here. Mm-hmm. So that part is really important for us. It's really important for us also to be in a place where we are culturally comfortable and culturally competent, and that matters too. And as having grown up as the child of immigrants in the U.S., you're by definition in sort of living in two worlds in a lot of ways. I grew up in Los Angeles, and you're Mexican as hell all day long until you step out your door, and then you kind of got to be as white as you can, and then you're living in that dichotomy, and it feels really awkward. It's a weight. It's a mental weight, and we come here and we shed all of that, and that's amazing. From the economic point of view, we here have not experienced, for example, anything that I would call deprivation at all. Anything that we're able to get in the United States, we're able to get here. And as it's pretty funny. Like sometimes we complain about, for example, the line at some government bureaucracy type place, and we complain about it and we bitch about it. And then we go back to Miami, where my wife is from. We actually split our time between here and Miami. We go back to Miami and it's just as bad. It's the United States. And, it's just, there's nothing that we're missing out on here. I love that my kids are here. I love that there are no school shootings here. School shootings is not a thing here. I don't feel that, and how do you put a price on that level of security, of comfort, of knowing that I'm going to send my kid to school and I feel good that they're going to be safe and I'm going to be able to pick them up in the afternoon. How do you put a price on that? So that's all of that. I feel like we are living, frankly, way beyond here, whatever concept of the American dream, just to sort of bring it back to that, as you put together the American dream here, we have comfort, we have safety, we have affordable luxury. We have, and then add to that, we have beautiful beaches and bachata, so it's really the right move for us to be certainly outside the US. And this place has become definitely second home for us,
No, and it's beautiful. I mean, I feel the same way with Puerto Rico, and obviously for me, my family is there, and but we're fortunate that the house that my father grew up in, we still have the family, so I stay out there a lot. And it's a similar, like I find I was somebody who was always like, I would never leave New York City, or I would never leave driving distance of New York City, right? I was obsessed with it. I love New York, and I still at my core love New York City, right? And all that, the opportunity that is there and the energy of it. But I also think I recognize now what I've been sort of calling energy is really like stress hormones more than anything, right? It's like, it's amazing to have these sort of like, I feel like I can survive anything mindset. And I think that was great for a point in my late 20s, early 30s. But now that I feel like I've sort of developed the discipline and that no longer serves me, now it just stresses me out, And that was part of my move to the suburbs, where I was like, why am I making every aspect of my life that much more difficult, even just down to carrying groceries? Like, why every aspect of it is more difficult just to be in the mix of it all. And what I realized is, moving to the suburbs and then spending now so much more time in PR, it's like, no, you're not supposed to be stressed out, on the go all the time, wired into the matrix, if you will, right? You're supposed to be able to have this downtime, this relaxation. And I notice a very drastic difference in myself when I'm there in Puerto Rico. I'm not in a rush to answer an email that doesn't necessarily need to be answered right now. I take care of what I have to do, and I'm like, I want to go sit outside and enjoy my coffee in the sun type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And to me, the ability to wake up every day and say that's actual success, right? It's not the having the name brand car in the lot or having the biggest house or living in meatpacking district in New York City where that's impressive, or the financial district or whatever. It's the real just core things that bring you peace at the end of the day, right? And to me, that has to be what takes over as the next iteration of the American dream. If the American dream is truly about, I think, finding happiness at its core, right? It's not so that we begin to replicate the stress environment that our parents grew up in and worked in, right? They were busting their ass every day, and we've just adapted that, but we wear a tie while doing it instead now, right? Like that's really what our generation has done, and we're really missing the mark of why you're supposed to work hard, right? And to your point, and we can kind of close out here, but the idea that we now live in this global world, that we're all interconnected, and like you said, you have all the access to any comforts that you want from the States, you have it there in the DR. It's a beautiful time to start thinking, do I really need all this extra stuff? Or maybe eliminate certain bills and open up more time for what's actually important to me in my life.
Exactly. I think what I appreciate the most is you bringing up this whole concept of sort of beginning to redefine the American dream and what it is. When we think about, like, for us, as we talk about it, it becomes basically understanding your superpower, learning to live in alignment with your superpower, and then basically seeing that fulfillment that comes with it, and the situation that you're in, for sure, needs to be one that brings you peace and safety and comfort and all of that. But is it the case that all of that, as you said, does all of that have to come with the capitalist definitions that have been thrown on us? Not necessarily. I have actually a very, very good friend who just moved from California, one of the most beautiful parts of coastal California, and she moved to Spain with her family. And it's fascinating because it sounds exactly like how you described yourself. There, she was so intense. There was just a constant intensity about her that was constantly buzzing. And then I talk to her now, and it's like the volume has just been turned way down, and that she sees a piece that she never conceived of before. It wouldn't have been accessible to her before, but she's very, and I think so much of it comes down to intentionality. She very intentionally went after that. That's the lifestyle that she created. She intentionally let go of a lot of the stuff. And at the end of the day, the valuation of the stuff was kind of holding her back, once she, as you said, surrendered that piece of it and actually could listen to, hey, what is it that I want? What is it that is going to make me feel good? And what's going to work best for my family? What's going to bring me those community connections that I'm looking for? All of that, that's what's valuable to her. And, she was brave, she did it, and she's reaping the benefits of it now, and I think that a lot of people, and it's not necessarily also moving abroad for everyone, that's a pretty big, radical move, and I get that, I get that. But I encourage people to, think about even the small changes that you can start to make to bring yourself into alignment. Think about the choices that you make. Think about 5 years from now. Visualize some ideal future for you. And what does that day look like? Like, what does that day look like? It's, as you said, is it the day where you start out and you walk out on the terrace with your cup of coffee, and what does that day look like for you? And how do you feel on that day, right? Because really, at the end of the day, this success, this fulfillment is about the feeling that you have and the impact that you have on the world, right? So really starting to think about, what's the feeling that I want to create for myself? What's the impact that I want to have on the world? And starting to gradually align your actions with those things. That's, for me, that's the ticket, man.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Dr. Paul Rivera, thank you so much, man, again, for making the time last minute. I feel like you took this episode to heights that it wouldn't have without you. So I really do appreciate you. What do you think you want to push? I know you guys have the book. Anything you want to push as far as what you're working on currently?
The book is still rolling. There's a workbook that goes with it. We've, in the time since I've talked to you, we've actually published the workbook in Spanish as well, because
Nice.
as I said, that's one of the big things that we want to do. Want to make sure we reach our community. Our website is BeActChange.com. We're b.act.change on Instagram. And really what we're really pushing at this point is that we're trying to do a lot more sort of speaking and workshops. We're speaking at the New Jersey Education Association soon, and really trying to get, as I said, to a lot of these sort of heart-driven, soul-driven, positive impact kind of things. So anybody who's looking for that, we're more than open to help. Amazing.
Well, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have you on again in the future, maybe under some brighter circumstances.
Anytime. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Dr. Paul Rivera, for hopping on the show. I feel like we just unpacked so much. It went over so much. I knew it was going to be great, but I think it was better than I even expected. That's a testament to him and the work he's done, and I think the relevancy of so much of this conversation right now. We'll kind of tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusions Stew.
Time for Conclusions Stew.
Like I had said in the interview, I think starting it, I plan on kind of tackling this episode a bit by myself, right? Because I think I am somebody who has operated or sort of begun to say, wait, the American dream is not feasible, or it doesn't look like what I was promised, or I don't even want what is designated as the American dream, right? So I wanted to tackle this conversation even sort of harder than I have in the past. And for me, I then was sort of kept thinking back to conversations I've previously had on this, and Paul kept coming up in my head. So I had to have him on. Shout out to him. I emailed him literally yesterday afternoon, and he was like, listen, I got a packed day, but I can make time for you in the evening. And I was like, say less. I don't care. I'll hang out in the studio all day, and we'll knock this out. So he just touched on a lot of stuff, man. I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. I'm super energized by the conversation, if you could tell. But I think for me, the greatest takeaway and what I'm reminded of is our need to unlearn all of the bullshit. Our need to eject the voice of our parents, of our friends, of the fucking television, of TikTok. Eject it from our mind and try and get as clear as possible the authentic voice within us. And again, I'm not woo-woo fucking guy wearing a drug rug, smoking peyote and telling you, rainbows and unicorns are the answer to all your problems. I know this type of stuff sounds hokey and sounds weird, but I'll leave you with the story, right? And this is why I'm so big on intuition right now. And it's funny, he brought that up amidst the conversation. But intuition, to me, is your most honest voice. It is God speaking to you, the universe speaking directly to you. And like I said in that conversation with him, I've talked about how rough 2024 really was for me, how uncertain it was on so many different levels, and how the things that the thing that's brought me peaks and allowed me to begin to turn a corner has been this sort of surrender into just being happy, trying to do what brings me joy as much as humanly possible. And ironically, that has yielded me the career opportunities that I had been sort of anxious about and looking for, right? And I guess the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this story here. Like I said, I just got back from being on the road. I was in Puerto Rico. I was in Miami. I was DJing. Originally, that run of shows was just supposed to be Puerto Rico. I was just going to do Puerto Rico and come right back home. And then I was coming home the week of Miami Music Week, which is a big music conference. Winter Music Conference is out there during Ultra Festival. Any of my EDM heads, you guys are familiar with that. And I've done this conference on and off for probably about 10 years. And it's always sort of in the past, especially as I was coming up, was a great way for me to network, to meet people, to solidify relationships, to create opportunity. Eventually, I kind of got to a point where it started becoming a bit more of a party for me. You know, I wasn't really making new connections. I kind of felt like I was just going there to party, essentially, right? And I stopped going. I didn't go last year. I think I went the year before for the first time in years. And I wasn't going to go again this year. And as I'm looking at flights returning from Puerto Rico back to New Jersey, I just was overtaken with anxiety, and I was thinking about Miami, and something in my head was just like, you have to go to Miami. And then I have my mother's voice in my head, and I swear to you, like, my mother's voice is the voice of my anxiety, right? And a lot of that is the fear-based upbringing, right? Like, short anecdote, I don't know how to swim really, and I owned a pool as a kid. I had a pool in our backyard, right? And it's because my mom was so scared of me drowning, she didn't teach me how to swim. Think about the fucked up logic in that. You're scared of your kid drowning, so you're just not going to teach him how to swim. And actually now, throughout the course of his life, put him in further danger to potentially actually drown and die if he's swimming anywhere aside from under your supervision wearing some swimmies. I was like 10 years old, you know, wearing swimmies for no reason. Dark times. Anyway, so the voice in my head of anxiety is my mom's voice. And so many times, as much as I've been a rebel and I've not done what they've wanted me to do, there have been so many times where I've given into that voice, her voice in my head, and I've ignored my intuition. And I'm really thankful that I didn't do it this time, right? Because there was a part of me that was kind of like, listen, we're trying to be a bit more financially responsible. You know, you're going to end up going out there. You're not getting paid to be out there. You're going to end up spending money. Miami is fucking super expensive, right? It's stupid expensive. You're already out there late. You're not, you know, the opportunities for you to maybe work there where you could have gotten stuff paid for are gone. So there was so much of like, and I was also like, how are you going to close your business? I have my U-Haul business. I have my dog to worry about. Now my parents are going to take him for another week. I don't want to hear their, you know, complaining about that. But again, my intuition was like, you have to go. And long story short, it all worked out. I ended up going. I ended up getting booked for some gigs. I ended up getting some paid gigs that I wasn't expecting. But the crazy part is, I ended up making like a huge connection out there. And it's not anything I could talk about right now. I don't know where it's going to end up to, but it's literally like a game-changing connection. One that I've been sort of waiting for. Subconsciously. And again, I almost didn't go. And if I would have listened to the voice in my head, my mother's voice of anxiety, I wouldn't have gone. And I would have been sitting here without this opportunity that I just had a meeting about earlier this week. And I think to myself, how many times did I do what was against my best interest or against my own authentic happiness because I allowed the anxiety voice of my mother to beat out my authentic voice? And the point of that in the context of what we're talking about, this American dream and finances and where you live and the car you drive and all these different things, so much of that shit that only adds weight to our lives is the voice of somebody else. The car you're spending a dumb amount of money on is the voice of somebody else telling you you need that car, or the voice of somebody else telling you nice car. The job title you're fighting so hard for is not the job title that actually makes you happy, but instead the one that will yield you the voice of somebody telling you good job, or will be you proving wrong the voice of somebody who doubted you, right? And you're proving them wrong by taking on a job that you don't even fucking like, or by buying that house and living in that particular area. And you know that none of this stuff makes you happy, and your intuition is saying, we need to change, but that other part of you, the comfortable part of you, or the part of you that is scared of the judgment, or is living the dreams of your parents and can't say no or detach from that, that part of you is holding you back from the actual life that would make you happy. And that's why I wanted to talk to him about living abroad, and that's why I mentioned about me in Puerto Rico and like so much of what I'm feeling around that. And I'm still, I haven't pulled the trigger on moving to Puerto Rico permanently. There's a lot of loose ends to tie up here. But again, when you begin to open your mind and surrender to the possibilities of the world, and that your life might look a little bit different than what you expected or what the other people around you are telling you it's supposed to be, you then begin to see the opportunities that lie out there for you, potentially. And also, you begin to more clearly hear your authentic self and what actually might make you happy in this life. And that's what I'm trying to sort of get at in today's day and age. Because so many of us are fighting for shit that we don't even really want. We're fighting for a job that we don't even give a fuck about. It speaks to our passion in this no way whatsoever, right? We're fighting for a salary just to drive a car that we don't even really love, just to have a house that, is cool, but like it's not doing much for our sense of fulfillment, right? And it's so much of addition through subtraction, right? The American dream is predicated on more, and having all the sort of data points checked, where real happiness lies in subtracting the noise from your life, not adding more to it. And I think that is what I wanted to get at with today's conversation. I hope I was successful in that. I hope, again, to his point, moving abroad is not going to be for everybody. It's not that easy. But even for me, I left the city and moved to the suburbs. And yeah, there's things about the city that I miss and I love, but I'm leading far more of a life that I would have never led when I lived out there. People ask me all the time, why do you live all the way out there? Because I would have paid what I paid for this property. I would have paid that for a mediocre apartment in a transitioning area, a 1-bedroom apartment, right? Whereas now the first purchase that I made, I ended up building out my dream studio, right? And then was able to move on from there as far as my living situation. But I now have far more of what I want and am far more fulfilled. And yet it's never going to be perfect. No place, no area is going to have everything that you want. And for me, this has been a beautiful, few years of enjoying the suburbs, enjoying having the studio space out here and having businesses run out of this building and renting and doing different things. And the next evolution might be even deeper and deeper into my peace, right? But my point with all of this is to challenge you to open your mind beyond what you thought your life is going to look like or is supposed to look like. And understand that we're living in a world where there's really no fucking rules anymore. And nothing is for certain. And if that's the case, I might as well double down on what makes me happy. That's really what I want to get at, right? I'm going to quote myself. I'm going to end on this. I know I keep fucking extending this, but you can tell I was going to do this episode by myself because I have so much more to say. But to quote myself, if you will, many of our parents came here, sacrificed everything, worked their ass off to create something out of nothing so that we can have a better life. But what have we done? We literally have taken the same toxic work mentality that they did out of necessity. We're now doing it because we think it's the right thing to do. We're carrying that same burden, but we're wearing nicer clothes while doing it. We're wearing a suit to work instead of, scrubbing the ground, if you will. And for what? They actually had a real reason. They were trying to get out of dire circumstances. And not to say some of us aren't in difficult situations, but many of us are killing ourselves for materialistic bullshit. What's the point? If you cut down your spending habit, you could be doing more of what you actually want to do. You could be having a job that pays you less but fulfills you, but fills your cup. You could be living in an area that actually brings you more peace if you weren't worried about proximity to a big city or, the size of a house or what township it's in or whatever the fuck it is, right? Like, my point is, a lot of the American dream that we've been sold is rooted in capitalism, which is rooted in consumerism, essentially. And not rooted in happiness and fulfillment. And that's where we have to begin to focus. Let the wake-up call of the fact that you can't buy the fucking dream home because nobody can afford it. Let that be a moment where you stop and say, do I even really want the fucking dream home? Is that really even what I want? Or would I be happier living somewhere else in a smaller spot? But at least like my money is going towards things I actually want. Maybe I don't have to now work 80 hours a week to fucking afford the dream home or the dream car or whatever the fuck it is. Like, I'm going to drive my Jeep into the fucking ground. Like, I refuse. I'm not getting caught up. And there are times where I find myself being a little bit caught up, right? When the bullshit of the outside world seeps in. But in the grand scheme of it all, the fact that I refuse to, when my lease was up, I refused to go and just get another fucking lease of an expensive brand new car. And I said, fuck that. I'm going to save money. I'm going to keep this car. It's in great shape. It's a tank. And I'm going to keep the basic upkeep until this thing stops running. I don't care. I don't need to upgrade or prove my success through the car that I'm driving, And granted, I'm not driving like a piece of crap, but it's not a brand new car. I think it's 2019 at this point. Right? So pushing 100 miles on this bad boy. But old me would have traded that shit in and got himself into fucking debt on a expensive, foreign car because that's what Dramos is supposed to be driving, right? And this is what I mean by unlearning all this shit. By not doing that, like the difference in car payment between the Jeep and like the foreign car that I was tempted to get or the more expensive car, that's literally a plane ticket to Puerto Rico every month. The difference that I'm paying. I'd much rather drive the Jeep as my daily driver, which I fucking drive barely anything because I live right near the studio. So once a week I have an actual commute. I'd much rather drive this car into the ground and not, impress anybody with the car that I pull up in if it means that I can fucking catch a flight to Puerto Rico whenever the hell I feel like it. I'd much rather do that. That's actual happiness. That's actual success. That's my American dream. Part of it, anyway. I went on a whole tangent. I apologize. I'm yelling at you for no reason whatsoever. I love you. But yeah. Big shout out to Dr. Paul Rivera for hopping on the show once again. Apologies on leaving you hanging last week. Again, literally, I've been in bed. I was in bed for 5 days straight. I still feel lingering effects of the flu. I'm still tired. I still am congested as all hell. So I'm not 100%. But enough to do the podcast. With that said, we'll catch you on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. Again, more financial literacy episodes for all of April on Tuesdays. And then, we'll catch you on Thursday for Thursday Trends as normal. Till then, stay safe. We'll talk soon. Peace.